Today in Vlast KZ. Trouble in Zhezkazgan. A special report from Zhezkazgan where a copper giant plans to lay off its already underpaid staff. Samruk-Kazyna exits state companies. President Nazarbayev instructed the welfare fund Samruk-Kazyna to exit previously nationalized private banks such as BTA, Temir and Alliance. Samruk Fund already did what it had to do and is no longer needed. Dark days of real estate investors. There are three types of real estate investors: the regulars, who are hard to find, the more common deceived, and the new type, the evicted ones. Kazakhstan's field of real estate investment faces major troubles. Respublika and prosecution. Independent newspaper Respublika continues to face prosecution as its reporters deal with administrative litigation.
Vlast KZ на канале.
Hello, I'm Asylbek Abdulov and you're watching Vlast KZ on KplusTV channel.
Экономика, потом политика. Главным экономическим ньюсмейкером.
Let's get economy out of the way first. Nursultan Nazarbayev remains the main economic newsmaker in Kazakhstan. Just recently, he announced the merger of pension funds and then exposed the information about $10 billion missing from anti-crisis accounts. This week, the head of state instructed the welfare fund Samruk-Kazyna to withdraw its assets from three banks, BTA, Temir and Alliance, all within 2013. A couple of years ago, the state practically nationalized these commercial banks, and political scientist Rasul Jomali believes the new turn of events is best summed up by saying it is easy to join the war, but it is hard to quit it. The nationalization of these banks apparently was an unsuccessful experience, which once again confirmed the widely known truth that the government is in fact quite a poor manager.
В очередной раз подтверждая избитую истину, что государство плохой менеджер.
Last week, President Nursultan Nazarbayev gave a task to the government to sell BTA, Alliance Bank and Temir Bank to private investors. The operation is supposed to be completed by the end of the year. Although there are no potential clients to purchase these banks yet, there is now a perspective of setting up a special state commission to examine banking scam. Nazarbayev deliberately chose the time for his task, as in early February it has been 4 years since the government forced nationalization of several private banks in Kazakhstan, including BTA, one of the largest private banks on the territory of the CIS. At that time, this decision was triggered by the crisis and the government promised to sell BTA to new owners in no time. However, it soon became clear that nobody was eager to buy the state bank, thus the government had to take over the funding of the loan giant. According to the documents released by Senator Gani Kasimov, the country lost over $10 billion on the so-called operation to prevent the bank failure. This is a very serious issue. $10 billion of diverted funds. These are unfinished schools, non-paid benefits, unfinished construction of projects, including those discussed by the MPs today. We have to give a clear answer. What is wrong and where did this money go? Our colleagues from the Respublika newspaper scrutinized all the figures to find out what formed the total amount of the state losses. The sum of $1.7 billion was paid for the BTA new shares released shortly after the bank nationalization in February of 2009. The sum of $945 million was paid to foreign creditors under the terms of the BTA bank first restructuring. The sum of $1.6 billion was paid to foreign creditors under the terms of the BTA Bank's second restructuring. The sum of $1.2 billion was withdrawn from Samruk-Kazyna fund deposit held in BTA Bank and later spent on the purchase of the BTA new shares under the terms of the bank's second restructuring. Over $6 million is the remaining balance of the Samruk-Kazyna deposit in the BTA, which cannot be withdrawn as it will lead to the bankruptcy of the bank. The sum of $2.9 billion was received by the bank as various credits from the National Bank of Kazakhstan. Unfortunately, only the state treasury can return the money. $750 million was spent on issuing BTA bonds to foreign creditors under the terms of the bank's second restructuring. The bank promises to pay this debt off on its deferred revenue, although in reality it's just the future expenses of the budget fund. The agreement was on the recoverability, but it is unreal so far. This is the data that I got from the Samruk-Kazyna fund. If this is the case, then why Samruk-Kazyna claimed that something was recovered? The heads of the finance ministry and the economical planning say that we are going to recover that money, when the head of state says that nothing was recovered.
финансов и экономического планирования говорит, что мы еще и вернем все эти деньги.
There's no doubt that Kasimov's speech was at least coordinated by the president. After 4 years, the authorities urgently need to find those guilty for the bank fraud, and apparently the actual executives of the bank's seizure will end up being accused. General Director of the rating agency Expert Ra Kazakhstan Adil Mamajanov thinks that at that time financial supervisory authorities could not realize the gravity of the issue.
Есть такая поговорка: знал бы прикуп, жил бы в Сочи.
There is every reason to assume that in 2009 the decisions on BT bank forced nationalization were taken in the conditions of inefficient information gathering.
Они предпринимались в условиях не полностью и недостаточно достоверной информации.
However, according to the document posted on Ablazov's official page on the very anniversary day of the BT bank seizure, it did inform President Nursultan Nazarbayev and the officials of the adverse consequences of the bank nationalization. Thus, the government did realize what actions they were taking and the potential results that would follow. Unfortunately, a significant part of Ablazov's negative forecast made on the eve of the BT forced nationalization has come true.
Безусловно, вся эта ситуация с БТА банком.
The issue of BTA Bank has deeply affected the country's financial sector. The bank's forced nationalization has caused an adverse situation in the whole financial sector.
Они очень сильно отразились на финансовом секторе.
The fact that the top officials were aware of the adverse consequences of BTA forced nationalization makes the authorities' attempts to put the blame on the actual executives of the bank's seizure at least ridiculous. Nobody doubts the fact that there were no economic reasons to seize the bank. Now all experts are making forecasts who will eventually buy BTA and at what price. The sale deals will not be public as the bank's assets are very specific and not investment attractive. It should be a large corporation which will be ready to spend $6 billion on a financial institution that is expected to yield losses for another few years. The only value the bank has is its legal and operational existence, residency of the Republic of Kazakhstan, and a widespread branch network. In short, China is expected to be the only potential investor for BTA, but only if they're given the bank for free and moreover paid at least half of the potential losses, which vary from $3 to $6 billion. Expert agencies assess the perspective of this purchase as extremely low and the consequences as quite negative. If the government, represented by the National Welfare Fund, Samruk-Kazana, resigns from BT bank shareholders' composition, this financial institution will lose substantial support given after its nationalization. There is a low probability of finding new owners with a comparable level of financial resources and influence in Kazakhstan. The rating agency's skepticism towards the bank sale can be explained as it's really hard to find a real investor who will throw away money as the government did. Senator Kasimov promises to resolve this alarming issue. He proposed to create a national commission to investigate the banking scam and punish those who caused Kazakh financial Panama. I ask you to create a state commission over this issue and based on the results of its work, provide a response to the parliament on where did these funds go. The only question is how far Senator Kasimov dares to go.
Будут и город, и море.
Back in 1936, geological engineer and aspiring academician Kanish Satpayev told residents of the village Naushabai that one day they will see a real city and a sea next door. You've never seen a city like that, he said. Kasakpai and Jaskazgan were both born of our poverty, whereas the new city will have streets as straight as arrows. All houses will be beautiful and as high as 5 barracks built on top of the other, all surrounded by flower gardens. It will be as big as 10 Kasakpais and hundreds of Jaskazgans. We will build a factory here and Jaskazgan mine will end up as a remote suburb of the city where people will commute to work. Fast trains and big buses will always run between the town and the mine, so that you can get to the mine faster than the water boils in the kettle. This prediction materialized only partially. A sea indeed appeared here in the form of Kengis Reservoir, but the new city was never built and instead was transformed into a working village, Большой Jaskazgan. Copper extracted from local lands didn't bring any joy to generations of Jaskazgan residents, and a similar gloomy fate awaited people in the oil-rich western Kazakhstan settlements of Kulsara and Zhanaozen. The copper giant's benefits somehow escape ordinary workers. Even worse, Corporation Kazakhmys now plans layoffs, stripping people of their last chance to earn a penny. Why are you covering up for thieves? They are serving you. Laborers and residents gathered at the central Zhezkazgan Metal Workers Square on Saturday in support of the former labor union head Saulia Saidakhmetova and Veterans Council former chairman Murke Akpambetova. They also demanded to put a stop to cuts in production from Kazakhmys Corporation. Despite the fact that organizers issued an invitation almost a month ago, only 30 people showed up. They unwrapped banners saying "Leave Ogay" and "Stop Milking Kazakhstan." But minutes later, city administration employees made them wrap them up again. Your campaign is unsanctioned and you didn't get a permit from the administration. How can we if he is Ogay's man? Hold on, I'm asking you not to disturb public order and leave the premises to avoid any clashes. The warnings didn't end on that. Our filming crew was approached by 2 police officers and referring to the court order to suspend the activities of the company, which they admitted didn't present, was warned that continuing filming is liable with arrest. Are you limiting our work? If I understand correctly, you are saying we cannot film here. That's right. Why? Due to a court order, your activities are suspended. Can you show it? You're the law enforcement officer. Your activities as a TV company are suspended at the moment. At the same time, one of the campaign organizers began reading out a resolution and the officers switched their attention to him. Activist Berik Zagiparov's public reading was suddenly disrupted by public activist Yermek Narımbayev, who attended the Zhezkazgan campaign from Almaty, as he claims, on his own accord. Berik, let's go talk. Where? I won't go. Okay, let us talk here. Let us take this resolution to Kazakhmys and pass it to leadership. Hold on, Berik, let me tell you the news. Do you want to hear them or not?
Yep.
Having won the attention of those gathered, Yermek Narımbayev spoke about how he and his colleague from Astana, public activist Musagali Duanbekov, were able to meet with local authorities earlier and offered the head of the administration's internal policy department as proof. The workers themselves must decide who will be their spokesman, and next week the mayor's office sits down with Zhezkazgan Tsvetmets labor unions and settles disputes peacefully. Do you agree? Yes. Campaign organizer Berik Zagiparov attempted to regain the initiative and pass on the demonstration's resolution to Kazakhmys leadership, but the office met him with closed doors. I am the organizer and the inviting party. The fact that someone else is doing something is unknown to me. We wanted to pass on the resolution we voted on and attract the media's attention to the problems of Zhezkazgan. Berik Zagiparov is the chief editor of the Zhezkazgan newspaper. He speaks about experiencing constant pressure from local authorities. Printing houses refused to publish his publications, while this week the latest issue was unable to reach its readers on time. Молодежная газета, or newspaper for the youth, was printed in one of the Almaty's printing houses and passed on by rail. The train arrived, but the newspaper didn't. Zagiparov is convinced the local law enforcement bodies confiscated the issue without a trial or investigation. Everyone is living with unease in Zhezkazgan because nobody knows what will happen to them in the future. Will they have a job? Will the town survive? Where to move? How to live? They don't even know if it will reach the tipping point, and at a moment's notice our call may be the spark that ignites the entire region. An anonymous caller asked me, wouldn't I rather stop all this for my own safety? Murke Akmambetov, the Zhezkazgan Veterans Council former chairman, is no longer surprised by these phone calls. On January 21st, as an active leader of the council, he was not allowed to his board meeting, along with the other elderly, by the police. The same day that he found out that he was removed from his post by the majority vote. The labor veteran holds on grudges against the police or his colleagues that voted behind his back. He's outraged by the official wording that he was unable to establish contact with the local authorities. Murke Akmambetov believes he paid for his fearless statements against Kazakhmys Corporation leadership. At the November 2012 regional administration meeting, Murke Akmambetov spoke out against higher electricity tariffs of the recently created Zhezkazgan Energosbyt company.
Агай говорит, это Zhezkazgan Energosbyt нам не относится, говорит.
Agay says Zhezkazgan Energosbyt is not associated to them. One of those in attendance said its founder is the corporation's commercial chief executive, while another founder is the CEO. You're not being honest. Then there was another wrong answer given by Agay.
Генеральный директор, ваши работники, а вы говорите, не относитесь.
Saule Seydakhmetova is another victim of the corporation's activities. She was fired from the post of Zhezkazgan Enrichment Plant's labor committee for the same reason as Mr. Akhmambetov. Saule was elected by workers last November and fought victoriously for higher wages. She was fired in absentia when Saule visited Astana to meet with the Deputy Minister of Labor. The new chairman was not elected but chosen by the plant's management in violation of procedure.
Правком должен избираться снизу вверх.
Leadership must be elected from bottom to top. For example, a union committee leader is elected at a plant. He is a member of the Zhezkazgan Tsvetmet union, and the chairman is elected from that pool, and so on. But we had a former Karaganda region governor. How can we talk about independence? Saturday's demonstration, even in its slow attendance, stayed up the local administration. That same day, Zhezkazgan Mayor Baurjan Shingisov agreed for the first time to hold an open meeting with public activists and campaign organizers. The mayor didn't offer any direct answers to some of the sharpest questions, but he did reassure that there will be no layoffs in the region.
По заверению руководства, никаких сокращений людей не будет.
There is an optimization conducted with labor unions. It means one worker is transferred from one region to another, but leadership reassures that there will be no layoffs, 100%.
И понятие оптимизации с одного участка переводить на другие участки.
In response to a question about social tension in the region and the population's dissatisfaction with living standards, the mayor pointed out there is no comparison between Zhezkazgan and Zhanaozen. He promised the local administration will not allow a similar tragedy to take place in the region. This is our common tragedy, and we must not allow these disputes in any Kazakh city. I'm telling you once again, Zhezkazgan will live and prosper. A conference among enrichment plant employees is scheduled for February 11th, where a new labor union head is planned to be elected. The city administration promises to be an unbiased arbiter. Talks are also planned to be conducted among the corporation employees and Kazakhmys management. The city administration promises to assist in that regard as well.
В продолжение темы еще один небольшой экскурс в прошлое.
In 1933, Soviet government stopped the funding of the exploration works here. At that time, Kanish Satpayev told geologists and workers he received an order to cease the exploration and pay the salaries to people. He explained miners that he didn't know why the authorities made the decision, but believed it was a mistake, saying that large copper deposits of Zhezkazgan must be fully developed. Later, workers proposed to send a letter to Stalin and asked Kanish Satpayev for guidance where to find jobs to feed their families. In response, Satpayev said that he is not going to leave the deposit and will continue to work there even for free. He wanted to prove that the copper-rich land must be further explored. At the peak of the speech before the workers, he asked the crowd to join him in free labor and later equally share all hardships and results of their work. The former driller Mirzabek Tungushbayev recalls that 72 people decided to stay with Satpayev until the end and fight for the future of Bolshoi Zhezkazgan. That was the beginning of the epically heroic time for the settlement. The story continues to this day in our consumer age, but the controversial, heroic and inspiring past just gives more reason to compare it to our parasitic present. It has nothing new to show for itself, no spiritual or material values. It works on the redistribution and splitting resources created and gathered during the great and terrible Soviet era. The bigger story of the copper-rich Zhezkazgan is a real proof of that. It began in socialist times and continues to these days of oligarchic capitalism, still featuring a chronicle of heroism, drama and injustice. Next on Vlast KZ. Dark days of real estate investors. There are three types of real estate investors: the regulars, who are hard to find, the more common deceived, and the new type, the evicted ones. Kazakhstan's field of real estate investment faces major troubles. Respublika and prosecution. Independent newspaper Respublika continues to face prosecution as its reporters deal with administrative litigation. Stay with us. Vlast KZ will return with more in a couple of minutes.
Главные события в Казахстане. Достоверные факты. Эксклюзивные комментарии. Читайте в Казахстане информационно-аналитический портал «Республика». Чтобы обойти блокировки, воспользуйтесь доменом respublicas.info. Вы окажетесь на так называемом прокси-портале. Специально разработанные канадскими специалистами по интернет-технологиям, прокси-порталы помогают пользователям получать информацию в тех странах, где блокируют интернет-ресурсы – в Китае, Иране, в Казахстане. Вы принимаете условия использования системы и попадаете на страницу информационно-аналитического портала «Республика». Материалы интернет-портала также доступны пользователям всемирной сети Facebook – facebook.com/respublica.kaz. Если вы хотите поделиться информацией, вам есть что рассказать, звоните в редакцию «Республики». Наши телефоны в Казахстане +7 727 273 92 95, в Москве +7 495 621 87 03.
Новости Казахстана на казахском языке смотрите в 21:00 и далее каждый нечетный час. Новости Казахстана на русском языке в 22:00 и далее каждый четный час. Новости Казахстана на английском языке смотрите в 16:30, 17:30, 18:30 и 19:30 со вторника по субботу. Время Астаны. Изготовление и размещение рекламы на канале Кплюс.
The
recently appointed first deputy chair of the ruling party Nuratan, Baurjan Baybek, has finally appeared before the public. During his visit to North Kazakhstan region, he spoke of the party's short-term goals. More emphasis will be placed on the work in the regions and improvement of youth policies. A key task of the party is to strengthen the trust between the population and authorities. To achieve these goals, not only MPs but also senior officials will meet with citizens through the party's community liaison offices. Kazakhstan's opposition is also looking to gain support among the population. Last week, Zauresh spoke of tactical tasks faced by the fragmented and suppressed democratic opposition, something long awaited by many local dissenters. Batalova strongly believes that social issues in Kazakhstan serve as a political agenda for the unification of the opposition and referenced Russia as a good example. The March for the Rights of Moscow residents should serve as a starting point for preparing the elections to Moscow City Council. According to the organizers, it will focus on social issues and will be devoted to urban problems such as housing, traffic jams and demolition of historic buildings. In Kazakhstan, real estate investors, better known locally just as shareholders, are at the forefront of the struggle for social rights. Before even entering the public consciousness, the shareholders were immediately labeled deceived, something that became a defining trait of the concept. Deceived shareholders are the people whose developers fail to fulfill their obligations on invested property construction and never transferred the paid-for housing to persons holding ownership rights. The term deceived shareholder soon became widely recognized in Kazakhstan, but as life moves on, it slowly morphed the initial concept into evicted shareholder, which reflects the current drama of the real estate investment sector. 36 shareholders in Astana are being evicted for owning more than one apartment. This is the way the authorities are executing a governmental decree signed in 2010, which specifies that only one apartment can be owned per person. This is a residential complex Baikonur in Astana. Eviction procedures in the capital have never been that severe unless it involved the debtors. Yet this time the situation is off the wall. Interest holders who already have more than one apartment barricaded themselves and refused to voluntarily vacate their homes, while those who are trying to break through are also interest holders who still didn't get their only housing. Everything shall be divided. That's the way to solve the situation with the interest holders, according to the city administration. Instigated by the local authorities, people started to sue those who already own 2 or more apartments. The situation could be described as incitement of social hatred. However, the conflict of interest is based on a different legal framework. The government decree issued in 2010 allows 1 apartment per person. The Astana city administration received over $114 million from the state budget to complete 19 distressed facilities, 9 of which were incomplete residential complexes. The city administration managed to finish the construction of the apartment block buildings. However, there weren't enough apartments for everyone. Moreover, one of the provisions in the decree stated the following. The government of Kazakhstan rules, upon completing the construction, the interest holders are to receive no more than 1 apartment in the specified facilities. Following this decree, the court sustained the claims and the court-martials in turn proceeded with execution of the decision. This is how they responded to desperate resistance of those who owned more than 1 apartment. It resulted in the beatings. I have papers to prove it. 3 interest holders required a medical attendance, so we had to call the ambulance. I have the bill from the district doctor. Retiree Maksat Sadikova is expecting the court-martials any minute now. This is her 3rd apartment. 8 years ago, a widow with 3 daughters sold her real estate in Almaty and invested all the money into the shared construction. The real estate developer promised to commission the apartment block in 1 year. However, soon he ended up in the court and the state had to complete the construction. So now she will also be deprived of one of the apartments. We always ask for transparency in use of budget funds. The information such as who received the apartments and how much money was spent for each apartment block has to be publicized. Sadikova is one of the 50 evicted interest holders who own 2 apartments, while the total number of distressed interest holders in Astana is 400. The hype of the media and collective complaints made the social activists and MPs to intervene. They held a roundtable on February 6, where they defined this conflict as a social and managed to suspend the evictions, although not for long. They manipulate the situation by evicting some and letting others move in. It's a bad look for the executive agencies, which create social tension. They simply torture people by violating their rights and freedoms. In my opinion, people unwillingly involve in confrontation. They blame it on both parties, despite the fact that the government had taken the necessary steps to support these people. According to Galia Baligenova, the chairman of the Public Association, the Right to Housing, and concurrently head of the Housing Association with the same name, it's the fault of the conflicting parties themselves. They could have settled everything peacefully, yet they involved the destructive forces instead, steering the public, said Baligenova, implying the human rights defenders. The head of the Housing Association shows the lists of interest holders with 2 apartments who lost their housing and were promised by the local authorities to receive another one in the apartment block that is going to be constructed. The problem is solved. The apartment block will be built. I already mentioned that, and I will again. The people created this problem themselves by initiated lawsuits, evictions, and so on. However, human rights defenders believe that social tension will only increase unless the city administration involves the civic institutions to resolve the conflict and become more transparent. This is a total lawlessness. The authorities have been notified and we as human rights activists were ready to conduct the mediation procedures. Yet neither local administration nor court-martials showed us any initiative. Human rights activist Balatbek Blyalov said that local administration execute the government decree selectively. It is well executed when it comes to a government decree on eviction, whereas other state decrees are not. It is very important to effect the execution authorities, the most important branch of government decision-making, by joint efforts of MPs and public and social activists. We must change the situation in order to discontinue the evictions. On February 7, the interest holders gathered outside the court-martial's office demanding to resume evictions. However, none of the leadership addressed gathered people. Interest holders threatened to settle in their apartments by force unless the new occupants vacate them by law. They were impudent to occupy my apartment. Then, after a quick repair and remodeling, they've been renting it out, whereas I had to stay in a dirty, wet dugout with my baby boy for 2 years already. He grew up there, constantly catching cold. I had to bottle feed him because I was too stressed to breastfeed. Who's to blame for this? In fact, they do not have to pay a penny for residential rent. The bills are that big. How can they do that? Maksat Apay is ready to move out right away if the city administration and the housing association could provide at least a certain guarantee that the apartment block will be built as promised. An engineer with 40 years of experience says that she hasn't yet seen the documents confirming the initiation of construction. The coordinating council decided to build a new apartment block back in September. If they really initiated construction already, they could have shown us the generic design of the apartment block and permission documents for the use of land. In fact, such severe evictions wouldn't have taken place then. Local authorities promised to build an apartment block in Zhagalao micro-district on the outskirts of the left bank of Astana for interest holders who own 2 apartments. When will construction begin? How many apartments and how big are they going to be? And will there be enough apartments for all parties of the conflict? No one has answered these questions yet. The epic battle of the authorities versus newspaper Respublika, once known as Business Review Respublika, which later became newspaper Golos Respubliki, is still on. The publication is currently banned by a court order, and last week the outlet's former chief editor Tatyana Trubacheva faced administrative trial. This time the journalist was tried for being listed as a chief reader and the staff of an entirely new newspaper Republic, numbering 99 printed copies of circulation, which by the way doesn't require a state license for publication.
Издания.
Tatyana Trubacheva, the chief editor of the newspaper Golos Respubliki, Kaleidoscope событий недели, has been warned by the prosecutor's office on criminal liability for the violation of law. Uninvited guests have been visiting the office of the newly established newspaper Republic since the beginning of the week. Senior deputy attorney of Meteo district, Bakayev, told the chief editor Trubacheva that she could be considered liable for violating the court order to stop distributing banned media. You said, I distribute extremist publications. Tell me which one. Since 2013, the Republic was published 2 times in the circulation of 99 copies by the editorial staff of banned Golos Respubliki. Trubacheva is the first one to receive a warning, despite the fact she is titled only as the chief reader. They are generally afraid of anything related to Respublika, and therefore, I believe it doesn't matter how we name our newspapers. Even if we name it Long Live Nazarbayev and publish it in 99 copies, they will still be trying to shut us down. The officials of prosecutor's office insist that staff of Golos Respubliki, which was banned last year, continue to illegally working on the newly established newspaper Republic. The court banned a list of certain media. There was no ban to be working in a particular crew. The ruling didn't specify who I or our staff shouldn't be working with. There should be a clear definition of what is banned and what's not. However, it doesn't exist. Prosecutors themselves cannot provide any explanation. Therefore, as a legal expert, I advise them not to receive this document. Nevertheless, Tatyana Trubacheva was summoned to the court the next day. Her name is listed among the editors of the new publication, which was apparently considered a violation. The court ignored the counter-arguments of defense, which claimed there was no ban on holding a certain position. While colleagues of Trubacheva clearly showed the model of ideal journalism at the entrance to the administrative court. Brother of the surgeon Adil Kildibayev, who once held a legal proceeding against the currently banned newspaper Vzglad, the judge Galim Kildibayev was sealing the fate of the chief reader of Republic. Another mere coincidence is one of the prosecutors, Autalipov, who in late December of last year was involved in shutting down the newspaper Golos Respubliki. The motion to challenge the prosecutor was denied immediately. Who appointed you the chief reader? I did myself. Well, I read it too. Then I can put your name on the list of the readers as well. Prosecutors and law enforcement are trying to intervene with my professional activity. In fact, they even interfere with me reading newspapers. I am being prosecuted based solely on the fact that I appear to be the chief reader in the newspaper Republic. Yet there is no title of such kind registered anywhere. Should the prosecutors or bailiffs bother to study the law, they would have known better. Meanwhile, both the prosecutor and the judge apparently knew that Trubacheva is already found guilty. It was obvious considering how quick the verdict was delivered. A fine of 20 MCIs, which is about $230, is the price to read the Republic these days. There is no crime component because the title of the chief reader doesn't exist. One cannot be held liable for being titled in the publications. All of our courts make bizarre decisions that are ridiculed by the journalistic community in the whole world. Journalist Yermurat Bapi has been following the developments around single media and Tatyana Trubacheva. He was the first chief reader of the newspaper called Dat, which has been numerously renamed during the years of its operation. We had a delegation from the European Union. One of the journalists specializing in issues of the media persecution worldwide told me that I was the only chief reader in the whole world. I sure liked it, and ever since I've been holding this title. Yermurat Bapi recalls the story with a smile on his face despite the number of trials and even the prison term he had to go through. The authorities forced him to change the title, yet in all fairness, he is still the first chief reader of his newspaper. Quoting the famous character Afonia of the old Soviet comedy, who said that the whole system has to be changed. Otherwise, there will be no newspapers like Republic in the country. All of this has to do with one man in power and the fact that neither laws nor international regulations are indeed followed. Journalist Tatiana Trubacheva is banned from reading the newly established newspaper Republic. The appeal against the ruling of Medeo District Court to ban publication of Golos Respubliki and 24 other media was denied. Apparently, it is not that difficult to shut down any newspaper in Kazakhstan even without a court's ruling. It could be easily done by the mere will of the court-martial and the prosecutor by simply referring to this writ. Already 2 newspapers, Azat and Republic, were shut down in a similar manner. The reporting team of the banned media brought noodles to the state officials to signify that the entire process is fabricated. The last issue is regarding an official ban on the journalistic profession of prohibited publications. The servants of justice are terrified just by hearing their last names. In the meantime, theoretically there is no ban, yet in practice the journalists are inclined to organize flash mobs and performances to somehow express their discontent. Utkin kept asking the judge, "Your ruling implies that journalists shouldn't be working at all." They responded that the journalists are free to work in the same crew and publish any newspapers. However, the current situation is simply a dead end. Regardless, I believe that giving up is not an option. We shall continue working. We can name it whatever, there is nothing prohibiting it by law. Canadian hockey player Kevin Dolman, Astana's former defender, became the first Western athlete to accept Kazakhstan's citizenship. Similar moves did happen before, but only with sportsmen from neighboring countries like Chinese weightlifters Maya Maneze and Zulfiya Chinchanlo, as well as Russian Svetlana Podobedova. All of them later became champions of the London Olympics as part of Kazakhstan's national team. Yaroslava Shvedova and Mikhail Kukushkin, pro tennis players from Russia, also performed on behalf of Kazakhstan, and more recently Tatiana Nevzerova, the former member of the Russian lodging team, received Kazakhstan citizenship as well. She is currently preparing for the qualifying rounds of the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics. As for the St. Petersburg SKA defender Kevin Dolman, the primary purpose of acquiring this pro player for Kazakhstan's hockey team is to win the ticket to the upcoming games in Sochi. On Friday, in his debut in the national jersey, Dolman featured prominently in the qualifying tournament against France and helped the team to win 3-2. Next time Kazakhstan will play against Latvia, the tournament hosts and the main competitors, later facing the Great Britain. This was Vlast KZ on KPLUS channel. Join us next Monday for more trends highlights and a look into personalities of the week. Goodbye.